Saudara-saudari, selamat datang kepada semua. Terima kasih atas kehadiran di sidang media ini berkenaan dengan COVID di Masjid India. Ada juga berita terkini, which I'm going to ask Surin to explain to you. Bersama saya ialah of course Surin, who's acting for the Temple Committee, Encik Zaid, who's with Lawyers for Liberty. Dari Mandiri is Wong, is here. Dan juga pihak-pihak jawatan kuasa Badan Pengurusan KUL. Dengan ini saya serahkan kepada Surin kerana ia ingin bentangkan tentang berita terkini ini.
Alright, thank you very much Ambi, and good morning to everyone. Can I just mention that the President of the Temple Committee, that is Mr. Parthiban Kanmani here, so that we know who he is, Parthiban Kanmani, and he is the he's the head of the temple, okay, the head priest of the temple, which is Mr. Puendran, okay, and Mr. Rajmohan Pillai, who is the Vice President of the temple. Alright, so this is the main temple committee here, and behind us are members of the AJK, of the temple.
Jawatan kuasa.
Okay, Jawatan Kuasa. Alright. As Datuk Ambiga mentioned just now, there were developments this morning in this case. Yesterday we announced that we would be holding this press conference on the dire situation faced by the Devi Sri Patrakaliamman temple in Jalan Masjid India, of whom these are the temple committee members. Since then there has been a flurry of activity. Since we announced the press conference yesterday, we have seen a flurry of activity on the part of the authorities. And this morning, the mayor and others, I think, went to the temple and met with the temple committee and handed over a document to them. We are going to address what was in that letter that was given by the mayor this morning to the temple committee. But before we go into that, I'd like to invite the Vice President of the temple, Mr. Rajmohan Pillai, to state what are the facts in this case, the basic facts, and what is the position of the temple, and in fact why we are here this morning at this packed press conference. Can I invite Mr. Rajmohan Pillai to address the press conference on behalf of the temple?
Thank you, Mr. Surin. Okay. Salam sejahtera, selamat pagi. Wanakkam Citra Malam. Tujuan kami mengadakan sidang media ini adalah untuk menyelamatkan kuil kami yang mempunyai legasi lebih 100 tahun. Kami telah terima tekanan untuk mengosongkan tanah kuil. Ini bermakna kami akan terpaksa merobohkan kuil kami. Sedikit fakta dan latar belakang mengenai perkara ini. Terdapat kuil di kawasan ini sejak tahun 1893, iaitu sebelum merdeka lagi. Kuil yang berada sekarang mempunyai artefak peninggalan reliks daripada kuil asal yang lokasinya hanya beberapa meter dari kuil ini. Pada tahun 2008, kami telah diarahkan oleh pihak DBKL untuk memindahkan kuil ke kawasan lokasi sekarang, iaitu lot 328. Setelah pembinaan tapak kuil tersebut berlaku, suatu upacara penyucian besar, Kumbha Abhishekam, dilakukan dengan kerjasama dan bantuan pihak berkuasa, khususnya pihak DBKL. Namun tanpa pengetahuan jawatan kuasa kuil, kerajaan telah menjual tanah di kawasan tersebut, termasuk tanah atas mana kuil didirikan kepada sebuah syarikat swasta. Ini berlaku pada tahun 2014. Dan sejak 2016 terdapat beberapa percubaan oleh pihak kerajaan dan syarikat swasta tersebut untuk memaksa kuil ini berpindah keluar daripada kawasan ini. Ini adalah amat tidak adil kepada kami dan komuniti besar masyarakat India di kawasan Masjid India yang merupakan pengunjung dan penganut kuil ini. Kuil ini juga merupakan suatu pusat kebudayaan di kawasan Masjid India. Terdapat kelas tarian, Bharatanatyam, nyanyian, Sanggidam serta Dewaram dan yoga yang diadakan pada setiap minggu di kuil untuk kanak-kanak dan dewasa. Jika kuil ini dikeluarkan daripada kawasan atau dirobohkan, ia akan menghapuskan identiti masyarakat majmuk di kawasan Masjid India. Pihak kerajaan melalui DBKL telah membuat tawaran bagi satu kawasan alternatif yang mana saiznya adalah separuh saiz tapak kuil sekarang, dan tapak tersebut jauh daripada kawasan Masjid India, ianya langsung tidak sesuai. Walaupun rundingan berterusan dengan wakil-wakil DBKL dan kerajaan, kami terkejut apabila diberitahu suatu majlis pecah tanah akan dijalankan bagi melancarkan pembinaan masjid tersebut. Kami diberitahu majlis ini akan dirasmikan oleh Perdana Menteri pada 27 Mac 2025, iaitu dalam masa seminggu lagi. Kami gagal memahami bagaimana pecah tanah boleh dilakukan apabila rundingan mengenai status kuil belum diputuskan. Sebenarnya tidak perlu kuil dirobohkan. Terdapat tanah bersebelahan kuil atau mana masjid boleh didirikan. Kami mengalu-alukan pembinaan masjid di tapak bersebelahan kuil di mana ia juga akan mencerminkan sikap saling menghormati toleransi masyarakat Malaysia. Tidak perlu untuk merobohkan kuil kami. Kami percaya ini adalah penyelesaian terbaik bagi perkara ini. Akhir sekali, kami hari ini meminta supaya Kerajaan Madani mengambil langkah sewajarnya untuk mengekalkan kuil di lot 328 seperti pada masa sekarang, dan tanah ini digazetkan sebagai tanah kuil kekal. Sekian, terima kasih.
Thank you to Mr. Raj Mohan for that very clear statement of the position. The facts have already been stated very clearly by him. Before Datuk Ambiga will address on the main issues, I just want to address you on what happened this morning. This morning, the Datuk Bandar of Kuala Lumpur, I think Datuk Maimunah, yes, and I think many officials from the City Hall visited the temple quite of a sudden and met with the temple committee in front of the temple very publicly. They had also invited the media to be there and held a press conference. At the press conference, the mayor had handed over this particular letter to the temple committee. It is addressed to the chairman of the temple committee, right? We have examined the letter which we have just got, and there are a few matters here that I need to briefly address. Now, first of all, I am glad that the City Hall clearly states in this letter, and it's also come out in the news I think just now, that City Hall, which means the government, because DBKL is part of the government, yeah, that City Hall, DBKL, has given a commitment not to demolish the temple, right, pending negotiations. That comes out in the letter, and that has been stated by the mayor herself, right? There is a public undertaking. There are some other matters in the letter that I have to address now, because they are not accurate. Okay, what is stated in the City Hall letter is not accurate on some other matters. Firstly, the letter says that Dewan Bandaraya Kuala Lumpur mengambil maklum berhubung cadangan pembinaan sebuah masjid di atas tanah milik sebuah syarikat swasta yang terletak di Jalan Masjid India, Kuala Lumpur. This suggests that the government and City Hall had nothing to do with this construction, and they had just taken note of it. That's not accurate. I think I have to clear the inaccuracy. In fact, City Hall is the one that gave the development order for the construction on 12 February 2020. This is the DO that was granted by City Hall 5 years ago. You see? So in short, what I'm saying is that the government and City Hall were well aware of the proposed construction on the site of the temple. So that is not accurate. The letter also further says that the project itu merupakan cadangan oleh syarikat swasta berkenaan selaku pemilik tanah yang sah dan bukan daripada pihak kerajaan. Now, this is also not accurate. It is not a full and frank disclosure of the real facts in this case. The facts you heard just now, let me just pick out the important thing. The temple has existed in that area in one form or another since 1893. Right? It has served, a temple in that area, in that locality, has served the community since over 100 years. And some of the artifacts and relics from the original temple from the 1890s is kept within the current existing structure of the temple, right? So that is the situation. In 2008, City Hall, the DBKL and the government asked the temple to move to the current site. So they moved to the current site on the behest and request and in fact instructions of City Hall and the government, right? Having then been given the permission to reconstruct and carry out their daily activities in the temple, and again it became a community temple, in 2014 the land was sold by the government to a private company. Now, I must stress here that the temple was never informed about this sale. They sold the land with the temple, even though the temple was on top of it, to the private company. Hence the issues that have arisen in this case. The temple only found out in 2016 that the land had been sold to a third party, right? So, in other words, the land became tanah swasta because of the actions of the then government and DBKL, right? It is not a case of the temple going and building on somebody's private land and insisting on saying that. That is not the case, right? And I feel that the letter from City Hall gives the wrong perception on that. So we just want to correct that that factual statement in that letter. And I think also the reason why I am taking pains to correct that is that we cannot have a narrative which says that, look, this is private land, it's owned by a private party, and therefore you must leave. This is not a commercial property. This is a temple, a place of worship that has very deep roots in the community in the area. It is also a cultural center where classical dance and other activities take place. So it cannot be treated like a commercial property. The owner wants to, well, after the sale, the current person owning it wants to develop, therefore you have got to leave. It cannot be treated that way, and the government has a duty and responsibility to come forward and resolve the matter, because it is they who sold the land to the private company back in 2014. So to blame the temple committee in any way would be completely wrong, right? And it also disregards the historical development of how places of worship were built within communities who were working hard to build up this country, were hard-working ordinary people building up this country, carrying out their activities decades and decades ago, who required places of worship, which was encouraged by governments, successive governments, even during colonial times, right? And that is how the temple ended up where it is and in this predicament now, because they were set up by the people in the community as a place of worship long ago. So that is the second factual matter that I wanted to correct in the letter. Now the third thing, of course, there is a commitment given. I think Datuk Ambiga will address that, the commitment not to demolish that has just been given through this letter. Now I think that's what I wanted to clear up. Can I hand it over to Datuk Ambiga?
Sure. Thank you, Suren, for that. We've actually done a bit of a chart so you can get the dates correct. I think the fact of the matter is the temple has been there more than 100 over years longer than the current owners. They've been on the land so much longer than the current owners. And as I understand it, when it was alienated to the current private developers, the temple was never told. Am I right?
Yes.
You didn't know. They didn't know. All right? And there is such a thing, and it is a legal, hopefully we don't have to take these legal arguments, but there is such a thing as an interest in the land, an equitable interest in the land. So we would argue that in fact, the private developer who has, to whom the land was alienated, takes it subject to the temple's rights. They must have known the temple was there. Everybody knew the temple was there. So you cannot just ignore a temple who has been there for so long. As I say, it's more than 100 years, more than the current owners have been there. Now, there's something very unique about Masjid India. Very unique mix of people. You have largely Indian, but you have Indian Muslims, and you have, of course, Hindus. It also serves people who come from overseas, because there are hotels there, and they live in the area. So for years and years and years and years, everybody has been coexisting peacefully. Peacefully. Why in heaven's name does this government want to interfere with that? That was my first thought. But of course, this letter that was rushed over to the temple committee this morning promises that it will all be done, and they go into issues of, let me be clear, they recognize freedom of religion. They've said that in their letter. They also want to help, this is DBKL, to find the best way forward so that there is no discrimination between the races. I'm glad they've given that commitment, and I agree with that position. We agree with that position. We agree that this is freedom of religion cannot be breached, cannot be undermined in any way. Now, and they also have promised that any step that is taken will be in accordance with freedom of religion as has been enshrined in our federal constitution. So they're very well aware of our constitutional rights, all right? Which is good. Apart from that, DBKL also, they say they have found another location, Baru, etc., and they hope things will move smoothly. But I would like to add that they have to look at the flow in Masjid India. What is the characteristic of Masjid India? They have to look at all those factors. They have promised not to demolish. I'm not sure if that's an absolute promise. I take it as an absolute promise. That would be the best solution, that there will be no demolition, full stop. That's what we would like to see. But if they have other plans, then of course we also have some very, very constructive suggestions, which my learned friends here will also, sorry, I'm not in court, which my friends here will explain the suggestions, the very, very workable suggestions that we have. So we're hoping, if there is to be a discussion, of course for us the ideal situation is no, no destruction of the removal of the Kowil. But we also have some other suggestions that we want Dewan Mandarai, if they believe truly in freedom of religion and respect, we would like